The cold morning wind swept through the small town of Miller's Creek, a place that rarely appeared on maps and that most people only knew because of the road that cut through the center. Despite this, there was a peculiar mix there of simple people, farm laborers, and a few wealthy families who, curiously, kept their mansions away from the center, as if they wanted to avoid any contact with that all-too-ordinary life. Among these families was the Whitmore family, owners of a supermarket chain and investments spread throughout the United States. At the top of this dynasty was Jonathan Whitmore, a millionaire in his 50s, known for his ironic humor, his condescension disguised as cordiality, and his habit of saying that life only tests those who deserve to be tested. The phrase would become more meaningful than he had imagined. On the other side of town, living almost on the edge between the old houses and the wheat fields, was Evan Turner, a boy of only 12 years old. Thin, clever, and perceptive beyond his years, Evan helped his mother in everything he could. She had been working double shifts ever since the boy's father had disappeared 3 years earlier, leaving only debts and empty promises. Evan grew up fast, not just physically, but mentally. He learned to fix things, to cultivate small gardens, to do odd jobs for neighbors, and above all, he learned never to give up when something seemed difficult. His mother said he had a kind of strength that life can't break. Evan and Jonathan's paths rarely crossed. One was a boy who carried boxes, cleaned yards, and made small deliveries. The other was a man who cruised across town in luxury cars without looking back. But that week, the whole town was talking about the same thing, a charity event organized by the Whitmore Foundation aimed at supporting promising young people. The irony didn't go unnoticed by the residents, who knew the millionaire preferred publicity to genuine philanthropy. Evan hadn't planned on attending. He didn't have any fancy clothes to wear, nor the time for empty speeches. But the man he did odd jobs for, Mr. Harper, the owner of the neighborhood grocery store, insisted. "You should go, kid," he said as he restocked cans on the shelves. "These events always pick a young person from town to highlight, and it wouldn't be a bad idea if they highlighted you." Evan laughed, finding the idea amusing. He didn't see himself as anyone special. But that night, while checking the schedule of assignments she needed to submit, she remembered something. Her mother needed to pay an overdue bill at the local hospital. It was an expense that had been piling up relentlessly. Perhaps, just perhaps, having her name recognized at the event could open up a better job opportunity. So he went. The event seemed otherworldly. Bright lights illuminating the lawn of the Whitmore mansion, uniformed waiters circulating with silver trays, tables decorated with expensive flowers, and people who almost never set foot in the poorer part of town. Evan was wearing a shirt borrowed from Harper and a pair of shoes 2 sizes too big for him. He felt out of place, but he maintained his composure. Jonathan Whitmore appeared on the stage, set up in the garden, smiling as if he had pressed an invisible key that activated his public charm. "Welcome. Today we will celebrate the values that truly matter: hard work, honesty, and dedication." Those words drew discreet glances from the residents who knew his true reputation. After the speeches, he announced something unexpected. "We're going to do a little activity. I want to meet one of the young people here in person. Let's choose someone who hasn't yet been recognized in this city." The guest's eyes automatically turned to Evan, as if the poor boy were an obvious target. "You there, kid." Jonathan's voice broke the silence. "Come here." Evan felt his stomach clench, but he walked on steadily. When he reached the stage, the millionaire smiled like someone enjoying watching an experiment. He placed his hand on the boy's shoulder and, in a theatrical tone, asked loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Tell me, kid, are you honest?" Some people laughed at the question. It almost seemed like a school morality test. Evan became serious. He looked at the millionaire and replied, "I try to be, always." Jonathan laughed, a loud, rich, almost mocking laugh. "I just want to see if he's honest," he said to the audience, drawing more laughter. "Let's give this young man a chance." "A little challenge." He pulled a thick, sealed envelope from his pocket. "There's something valuable in here," Jonathan explained. "I'll ask the boy to take this envelope to my team at headquarters tomorrow morning. A simple test of trust. He doesn't need to know what's inside, but I'll know it's safe just by arriving intact," the audience murmured, finding it all amusing. The millionaire's wife, on the other hand, watched with a look that displeased everyone, as if she knew that this was no longer just a harmless game. Evan picked up the envelope carefully, as if it were glass. His fingers registered its weight, light but not empty. "So, kid, do you accept the challenge?" Jonathan teased. Evan took a deep breath. "Accepted." Jonathan gave a satisfied smile. But behind that smile lay something else. Expectation. An almost morbid curiosity to know if a poor boy would resist the temptation to open or steal something that belonged to a millionaire. He never imagined that very night someone would be watching Evan when he left the mansion. Much less that the simple task of delivering an envelope would turn into a tangled web of conflicts, suspicions, chases, and a revelation capable of turning the city upside down. Evan didn't know it yet, but the millionaire was about to discover something he wasn't prepared to face, because sometimes those who test others end up being the ones truly tested. The following morning dawned with a thin mist covering the streets of Miller's Creek, the kind of mist that gave the impression that something was about to happen, even if no one knew exactly what. Evan woke up early, as he always did. But that day he carried a different weight on his shoulders: the envelope. He had carefully placed it inside the drawer of the makeshift desk he used for studying, locked with the only padlock he possessed. His mother hadn't heard about the challenge he'd received. Evan preferred to avoid explanations that might cause concern. To her, he was simply making another delivery for one of Harper's clients. Before leaving, he performed a small, involuntary ritual. He took a deep breath, placed the envelope inside his backpack, and checked the zipper twice. The responsibility weighed heavily on him in a way that didn't seem fair for a 12-year-old, but he carried it nonetheless. The city was waking up when Evan passed by the grocery store. Harper, arranging boxes on the sidewalk, looked up, noticing the boy's tense face. "Is there a problem?" he asked. Evan hesitated. "Just one important delivery." Harper tilted his head. He wasn't one to ask many questions, but he knew enough about life to recognize when someone was carrying too heavy a burden. "Remember, kid, the hardest path is often the cleanest." That's all he said. Evan nodded, grateful for the simplicity of that advice. Whitmore Manor and its shadow. While Evan continued on his way, elsewhere in the city, the Whitmore mansion came alive with unusual activity. Luxury cars arrived and departed. Employees hurried to and fro, and inside the main office, Jonathan Whitmore reviewed documents with a serious expression. Contrary to what the public believed, Jonathan was not just an eccentric millionaire. He was a meticulous strategist, someone who structured each step with surgical precision. His empire was not built on smiles, but rather on unexpectedly tough decisions, risky negotiations, and an impeccable nose for opportunities. But there was something few knew. His fortune was about to enter a turbulent phase. Lawsuits were piling up, tax investigations were surfacing, anonymous leaks fueled rumors about irregularities in Whitmore Group contracts. And although Jonathan would never admit it, he was losing control of the narrative. The envelope delivered to Evan was related to this. It wasn't just a test of honesty. It was a delicate piece in a larger game where any mistake could be costly. At the mansion, his wife, Margaret Whitmore, observed her husband from afar. She was more reserved, intelligent, and possessed a keen sensitivity to hidden intentions. She disapproved of her husband's social experiments, especially when they involved children. The night before, while the guests laughed at the challenge given to Evan, Margaret didn't laugh. She simply kept her gaze fixed on the boy, noticing something Jonathan hadn't seen. Courage. Not impulsive bravery, but that silent resilience that only those who face real difficulties develop. A boy like Evan wouldn't easily succumb to a cheap test. But perhaps the world around him was trying to do it. On the way to the central office, Whitmore Group's headquarters were in the neighboring town, almost an hour away by bus. To get there without spending money he didn't have, Evan walked to the furthest stop, where the fare was cheapest. His backpack felt as heavy as if he were carrying stones, and with each step he imagined possible scenarios. Curious thieves, accidents, someone trying to intercept him. It wasn't paranoia, it was survival. Inside the bus, he sat near the window, watching the road unfold between dry fields and small, isolated houses. That's when he noticed something strange, a shiny black SUV that seemed to be keeping the same speed as the bus. Evan frowned. Maybe it was a coincidence. But too many coincidences often leave a trail. When the bus made its first stop, the SUV parked on the other side of the street. The same thing happened at the second stop, and at the third too. The boy swallowed hard, feeling his heart race. The SUV man inside the vehicle, a man in a dark suit, watched the movement intently. He held a leather briefcase and maintained an impassive, almost cold expression. His name was Clayton Reed, head of corporate security for the Whitmores, and someone who rarely acted without direct orders. Clayton wasn't there to protect Evan. It was there to protect the contents of the envelope. If the boy deviated even one step from the expected path, Clayton would intervene. Jonathan himself had authorized it. Watch, don't touch him unless necessary. For Clayton, this meant, make sure he delivers no matter the cost. He recognized that the boy seemed determined, but determination alone couldn't overcome the pressures of the adult world, especially when that world involved power struggles, internal accusations, and documents that needed to be protected with extreme care. Arrival in the neighboring city. As he got off the bus, Evan felt his legs go weak. The SUV stopped again a few meters behind him, but this time it didn't try to hide. The boy took a deep breath and continued walking between tall buildings and expensive shop windows, a stark contrast to Miller's Creek. The Whitmore's main office was imposing. Glass facade, modern columns, reception area with gleaming white floor. Everything there seemed designed to make it clear that this was territory inaccessible to ordinary people. Evan entered, hesitant. The attendant looked up, surprised to see a humble boy carrying a worn-out backpack. "Can I help you?" he asked with automatic professionalism. Evan gripped the backpack strap tightly. "I came to deliver an envelope. Mr. Jonathan asked me to bring it personally." The silence that followed was subtle but heavy. The receptionist took a few seconds to process it. Then she picked up the phone, dialed an internal extension, and murmured something of which Evan only heard 3 words. "Boy, envelope, urgent." As she spoke, Clayton entered through the front door. He walked with calm but firm steps, and his eyes went directly to Evan. The boy felt his stomach sink, and at that moment he realized that this was not just a test. It was the beginning of something much bigger. Clayton stopped a few steps from Evan, showing no expression that suggested a threat, but there was something about his posture that would make anyone cringe. He was the kind of man who occupied space without raising his voice, who conveyed authority simply by breathing. "Are you Evan Turner?" he asked, his voice deep and controlled. Evan simply nodded, trying not to show the fear rising in his throat. "Come with me." Clayton gestured slightly for her to follow him. The boy didn't have time to ask anything. Clayton was already walking towards the elevator, and Evan, though hesitant, followed. The receptionist watched the scene with wide eyes. It wasn't common to see the head of security personally escorting someone, much less a boy. Inside the elevator, Evan felt his heart pounding in his chest. The sound of the doors closing echoed like a silent warning that there was no turning back. "The envelope," Clayton said without turning around. "Do you have it?" Yes." Evan replied. "Don't give it to anyone until I tell you to." The elevator ascended several floors until it stopped on the 27th, where the doors opened onto a wide, quiet and impeccably organized hallway. Cool light reflected off the gleaming floor. The air had a faint scent of expensive paper and strong coffee. Clayton walked to a large meeting room, where glass walls offered a view of the entire city. He opened the door and gestured for Evan to enter. Inside the meeting room, the room was empty, except for an open folder on the table and a large screen displaying charts and confidential documents. Clayton closed the door behind him. "Sit down," he said. Evan obeyed. Clayton remained standing, analyzing something on his tablet. The man had a rigid posture, as if everything around him was a potential threat. Evan realized he wasn't there against his will. He seemed to be doing it with almost military precision. After a few seconds, Clayton put the tablet away. "Jonathan will be arriving soon," he informed her. "Until then, I want you to answer a few questions." Evan didn't like the tone. It sounded like an interrogation. "He only asked me to deliver an envelope," she murmured, trying to remain composed. "Yes," Clayton replied, "but I want to make sure there were no interferences along the way." Interferences. The word echoed in the boy's head. "Were you followed?" Clayton asked directly. Evan hesitated. Part of him feared that if he were honest, he might get himself into something even worse. But another part knew that hiding this could put him in danger, especially if that SUV really was after him. "I think so. A black car. It followed the bus the whole way." Clayton frowned, but didn't seem surprised. "Describe the car." Evan described the SUV, including details of the license plate that he had managed to memorize, purely out of survival instinct. Clayton wrote everything down. "Right. That confirms what I feared," he said, more to himself than to the boy. Before Evan could ask what that meant, the door opened. The arrival of Jonathan Whitmore. Jonathan entered with firm steps, wearing an impeccable suit and a practiced smile. But this wasn't the same smile he'd displayed at the charity event. It was narrower, more calculated, more real. "Evan," he said, as if he were reunited with an old friend. "I'm glad you came." The boy didn't answer. He was even more uncomfortable, especially because Jonathan seemed to be acting, as if he were putting on a show for someone. Clayton remained standing, but his expression changed to something even more rigid, as if he were awaiting orders. "Well, kid." Jonathan approached the table. "Did you bring the envelope?" Evan carefully removed it from his backpack and placed it on the table. Jonathan looked at the object for a few seconds, as if evaluating not the envelope, but the boy who had handed it to him. Then he picked it up and examined the intact seals. It arrived undamaged. "Good." He opened it, taking out a set of folded documents, just as I expected. He then turned to Clayton, and then? "He was followed," replied the head of security. Jonathan tapped his fingertips on the table thoughtfully. "Of course it was," he murmured. "They're getting bold." Evan frowned. Who's getting bold?" he asked, unable to resist. Jonathan smiled as if he finally remembered that the boy was there. "Nothing to worry about, Evan. You passed the test." That hit the boy like a punch. A test? Was that it? He'd faced a stalker, an unfamiliar SUV, and a veiled interrogation. Just for what? To prove he was honest? Or because Jonathan wanted to play a game with him? "It was just an envelope," Evan said, swallowing his discomfort. "I only handed it over because you said it was important." Jonathan tilted his head, studying the boy. Then he let out a light but humorless laugh. "Well, that's where you're wrong." He held up the documents. "This is much more than just paper." Clayton interrupted. "Jonathan, I don't think that's wise." "I know what I'm doing," the millionaire interrupted. "Let me talk to him." Clayton took a half-step back, but his gaze clearly indicated his disagreement. Jonathan sat down in the chair across from Evan. "I'll explain only what's necessary." He placed the documents on the table without allowing Evan to see their contents. Let's just say there are people interested in redefining the direction of my company. And they don't have good intentions. But why me? Evan asked, feeling genuine resentment. Why ask a child to do this? Jonathan smiled. Because nobody suspects a child. That's precisely why you were perfect for the job. It was as if the ground disappeared beneath Evan's feet. He felt a mixture of anger, indignation, and helplessness. Jonathan had used his innocence as a shield and still felt entitled to laugh about it. But before Evan could say anything, the door burst open abruptly. Era Margaret. She rushed in, breathless, with a worried look in her eyes, something rare for her. Jonathan, she said seriously, another notification from the audit just arrived, and this time it's not something you can ignore. Jonathan paled. Clayton immediately reached into his inside pocket, where he likely carried something more than just a phone. Evan realized for the first time that this was no simple test. It was an internal war. And he had just been placed right in the middle of it. The tension in the room became almost palpable. Margaret closed the door behind her and walked to Jonathan with firm steps, holding a different envelope, smaller but clearly official. The red seal in the upper left corner was enough to chill the blood of any businessman. Jonathan picked up the envelope, opened it quickly, and examined the contents. His face hardened. His eyes, once confident, now revealed something rarer, genuine concern. Clayton watched intently, ready to react to any sign of danger. Evan, for his part, felt as if he had been shrunk in his chair. He didn't understand everything, but he understood enough. This was serious, much more serious than any test could justify. "Is this a joke?" Jonathan murmured, turning the pages with increasingly tense hands. "No, it's not," Margaret replied. "They've finally reached their limit. You've provoked them too much." Jonathan threw the paper on the table, frustrated. "I didn't provoke anyone. They're the ones trying to destroy everything I've built, and you're giving them ammunition." Margaret's voice was firm but not aggressive. "Putting a boy in this, Jonathan? What's your problem?" Evan felt his face burn. In the midst of that corporate war, he was the least important person, but also the most vulnerable. Clayton took a deep breath, like someone trying to stay calm. "We need to act fast," he said. "If they sent this today, it means someone inside the company is leaking information." Jonathan's gaze hardened. "A traitor." He stared at Clayton. "Find out who it is, now." Clayton nodded briefly, but before leaving he turned to Evan. "You will stay where I can see you." The boy swallowed hard, not daring to argue. The leak subplot. Clayton left the room, and Jonathan began pacing back and forth, almost like a caged animal. Margaret remained near the table, her arms crossed, analyzing her husband, with a mixture of frustration, fear, and pity. "You've lost control, Jonathan," she said. "This should never have gotten this far. An internal audit doesn't just appear out of nowhere. Someone's pulling the strings." Jonathan stopped. "I know." Evan realized in that instant that there was something deeper at play. It wasn't just a power struggle. There were old grudges, guarded secrets, and bad decisions accumulating like heavy dust over all who lived under the Whitmore name. "Do you have any idea who is doing this?" Margaret asked. Jonathan hesitated for a few seconds before replying. "I have suspicions, but I can't accuse anyone without proof." "And that's why you put a child in the way?" she retorted. Jonathan sighed deeply and looked at Evan. "You were honest, and that's rare." His voice was lower, less arrogant. "I trusted you because I know you have no involvement with any of those people." A strange phrase. As if there were many there who didn't deserve trust. Evan tried to process it, but before he could ask anything, Jonathan's cell phone vibrated. He answered immediately. "I'm busy," he replied impatiently. The voice on the other end of the line was so loud that Evan could hear fragments. They discovered documents, investigating, someone in the board of directors. Jonathan clenched his teeth. "Hold this until I come down. Don't talk to anyone. Understood?" He hung up without waiting for a reply. Margaret approached Evan and knelt down to his level, something she would never do if she were just acting. "Evan, I'm sorry you're here," she said, with a sincerity that surprised the boy. "But now you need to follow everything we say, or you might get hurt." Evan nodded, trying to ignore the lump in his throat. Harper's loyalty. While all this was happening at the headquarters far away, Harper was behind the counter at the grocery store when he received an unexpected call. He answered, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Hello?" A male voice replied firmly, "Are you the man who hired the boy Turner?" Harper frowned. "Yes, it's me. Who's speaking?" "Just someone interested in the boy's well-being." The call dropped before Harper could ask. He stood there for a few seconds, staring suspiciously at the phone. This was all too strange, and when it came to Evan, anything strange was a sign of something bad. Harper grabbed his coat, hurriedly closed the grocery store, and went out, determined to find out what was going on. A danger sign. Back in the office, Jonathan turned to Evan. "You'll have to stay here for a few hours. It's for your safety." "Security?" Evan repeated, "but all I did was hand over an envelope." "This envelope could be worth millions," Jonathan said. "Maybe even my freedom." The phrase landed like a bombshell. Margaret looked at her husband disapprovingly. "Don't scare the boy." "He needs to know what he's gotten himself into," Jonathan retorted. Evan felt his stomach churn. He didn't want to be there. He didn't want any involvement with any of this. He just wanted to work, earn his honest money, and help his mother. "Can I leave?" Evan asked, his voice trembling. Jonathan hesitated. Clayton returned at that exact moment, striking twice and going in without waiting for a response. "We have a problem," he said. "Someone in the building is asking to speak to the boy, insisting it's urgent." Jonathan's eyes widened. "Who?" He didn't want to identify himself, "but I'm sure he's not here for good things." Clayton looked at Evan, then at Margaret, and finally at Jonathan. If this man is after the boy, then the envelope wasn't the only target. Evan felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean?" he asked, terrified. Clayton took a deep breath. "It means someone wants you, Evan, and it's not because of the envelope." The silence that followed was suffocating. Suddenly, it was no longer the story of a millionaire testing a boy's honesty. It was the story of a boy who had just become a central figure in a conflict he never asked to be a part of. And from that moment on, everything would become even more dangerous. Clayton's revelation that someone was in the building behind Evan turned the already tense atmosphere into something almost suffocating. Evan felt like his lungs couldn't draw in enough air, as if gravity had suddenly increased. Jonathan walked to the panoramic window and looked down. 34 floors below, cars moved like tiny, luminous insects. Outside, the world continued as normal. Inside, everything was about to collapse. "Who is this man?" Evan asked, almost in a whisper. "We still don't know," Clayton replied, "but I've already had the cameras reviewed. He tried to enter through the main reception, then through the garage. He's being too persistent. This is too strange to be a coincidence." Jonathan rubbed his hands over his face. "If someone is behind the company, and we're behind the boy, so we're no longer dealing with just a financial dispute." Margaret turned to Evan and approached slowly, as if he were a terrified animal ready to flee. "Evan, you need to be completely honest with me right now." She knelt down again. "Is there any chance someone is following you? Someone asked you something strange? Anything recent that you found odd?" Evan thought quickly. His mind searched through recent memories until one detail hit him like a punch. "Yesterday, I ran into a guy in front of the grocery store. He asked my name and said he needed to know where I worked. I thought it was strange, so I went inside quickly. He didn't follow me, but—" Evan swallowed hard. "He said my job could help reveal the truth." Clayton exchanged a quick glance with Jonathan. "That matches the description the security guards gave," Clayton said. "Tall, in his 40s, dark hair, aggressive posture." Evan nodded, terrified. "That's right. Jonathan slammed his hand on the table, annoyed. So it's no coincidence. This man already knew who the boy was. Margaret turned to her husband. Jonathan, what could he possibly want with a 12-year-old boy? What are you hiding? Jonathan hesitated. Truly, a silence filled with secrets settled between them. Evan, watching, sensed that this moment was more than just fear. It was a revelation about to happen. Finally, Jonathan said, I'm not hiding anything, but someone might be using the boy as bait to get to me. Enough people hate me right now without trying that. Margaret didn't seem convinced. Neither did Evan. The elevator that stopped. Before anyone could answer, Clayton's walkie-talkie went off. Clayton, this is Torres. We need you to come to the main office now. The south elevator stopped on the 22nd floor. We think the intruder got in there. Clayton picked up the device. Don't let the elevator be reactivated. I'm coming. He hung up and looked at Margaret and Evan. Lock the door. No one enters until I return. Clayton left quickly. Margaret went to the door and slid the metal latch across it. The sharp click echoed in the silent room. Jonathan took a deep breath. Evan, I'll be direct. You're safe. Inside here, but you can't leave until we sort this out. And you might be in the middle of something much bigger than you realize. The boy felt his heart race. But why? I only handed over an envelope, Evan insisted, almost pleading. Jonathan closed his eyes for a moment. Sometimes, Evan, the person delivering something is just as important as what's being delivered. That didn't make sense to Evan, but before he could insist, the door was slammed shut by something heavy. Margaret immediately stepped away. Jonathan, she said, her voice trembling, that's not Clayton. Another blow, stronger. Open the door, shouted a male voice. Open the door now! Evan recognized him. It was him, the man from the grocery store, the man who followed him, the intruder. Jonathan approached Evan and gently nudged him behind his desk. Stay down and don't move. The door was slammed shut again. The wood creaked. I only want the boy, shouted the man. Only him. Evan's blood ran completely cold. Margaret put her hand to her mouth. Jonathan picked up the phone from the table. Clayton, where the hell are you? He's at our door. Static, then only silence. The phone line had been cut. Forced entry. The door finally gave way, not completely, but enough for an arm to emerge, pushing with sudden force, making space. Margaret screamed. Jonathan pulled Evan behind the table. The man forced his way in, and when he finally managed to get through the door, his presence filled the room like a violent storm. He was larger than Evan remembered, his eyes wide, like someone driven by desperation. Not simple malice. I didn't come here to hurt you, kid, he shouted, his voice hoarse. I just need to talk to you. Jonathan stood between Evan and the intruder. Take one more step, and the police won't be quick enough to save you. The man raised his hands. I don't want his money. I don't want anything from that company. I just want justice. Margaret was trembling. Justice? What for? The man looked directly at Evan. For your mother. Evan froze. My mother? He could barely speak. What does she have to do with this? The intruder breathed heavily. He seemed to be struggling between anger and sadness. More than you can imagine. Much more. Jonathan took a step forward. Get out of my company now before You destroyed her life, the man shouted, pointing at Jonathan. And he said, pointing at Evan, is living proof of that. Evan felt the ground disappear beneath him. Proof of what? The man looked at Jonathan, who stood motionless, speechless. Margaret noticed something before everyone else. She turned slowly, facing her husband, and suddenly she turned completely pale. Jonathan, she whispered. No, don't tell me that. He didn't answer. Because there was no simple answer. The revelation. The intruder stepped forward. Boy, he said, looking at Evan with unexpected compassion. Your mother worked at this company. 13 years ago. She was unfairly fired, without explanation, without severance pay, and while she was heavily pregnant, alone, desperate. She tried to fight it, but this man, he pointed at Jonathan again, Did everything to silence her. Evan felt each word pierce him like a blade. No. He shook his head. My mother never told me that. She didn't tell you because she was afraid, the intruder continued. Afraid of him. Afraid you'd get hurt. Afraid he'd try to silence her again. Jonathan finally spoke. Enough. That's not true. All the documents show what you wanted them to show, the intruder interrupted. I was her supervisor. I saw everything. I saw how she was treated when she reported the manipulations in the reports. I saw when they tried to buy her silence. I saw when she refused, and I saw when you ordered her to be discarded. Evan almost fell backward. Margaret looked at her husband as if she didn't recognize him. Jonathan, what have you done? Jonathan took a deep breath, defeated. That's not how it was. Then explain, Margaret shouted. Explain now! He remained silent, and that silence spoke louder than any truth. The turnaround. The intruder knelt before Evan. Boy, I'm so sorry, but when I saw you yesterday, I knew who you were. You looked like her. She always talked about you, about how much she wanted you to grow up away from all this filth. Evan was crying without realizing it. Why are you doing this to me? Because you're honest. The man placed his hand on the ground as if surrendering. And your mother deserves for someone to finally believe her. Margaret turned to Jonathan. You destroyed this boy's mother's life, and now you've dragged him into it all? Jonathan looked at Evan, not with arrogance, not with contempt, but with something Evan never thought he would see in that man. Shame. I made a mistake, Jonathan said. I was younger, more immature. I did everything for the business, not for the people. I never imagined it would come back to... He didn't finish the sentence, because Evan already knew I would go back to him. Clayton returns. Suddenly, footsteps, heavy, fast. Clayton entered the room with 3 armed security guards. Let go of the boy, he shouted, pointing. The intruder raised his hands again, but made no threatening gesture. I didn't touch him. I just wanted the truth to come out. He deserves it. Clayton signaled, and the security guards stepped forward, pinning the man to the ground. While the intruder was being handcuffed, Evan shouted, Wait! Everyone stopped. The boy wiped away his tears. He wasn't lying, was he? Jonathan was unable to answer. The intruder looked at Evan with a gaze that mixed pain and pride. Be better than all of us, kid, and he was taken away. But the story was far from over, because now the truth was out, and nothing could ever be the same again. The room fell silent for long seconds after the intruder was taken away. The distant sound of the elevator closing, the security guard's footsteps, the metallic echo of the handcuffs. Everything seemed distant, muffled, as if Evan were listening underwater. He couldn't breathe properly. His chest ached. His hands were shaking uncontrollably. Jonathan, Margaret, and Clayton were there, but at the same time they seemed very far away. The world had turned upside down, and Evan was the only one truly falling apart. Margaret was the first to move. Evan, she said carefully, taking a step towards him, but he instinctively recoiled. He didn't want anyone to touch him. Not there. Not now. Jonathan ran a hand through his hair, nervously, but his expression wasn't arrogant like before. It was something else, something human, something Evan never imagined seeing. Regret. Evan, Jonathan began, his voice low, almost hoarse. I need to explain. I don't want to hear you, Evan replied, his voice trembling but firm. I don't want to. Margaret looked at her husband, demanding silent answers. Clayton remained tense, as if he were ready to react at any second. Should the boy faint, have a breakdown, or something worse? Evan sat down on the floor. His legs could no longer support his weight. He put his hands to his face. I wanted to be home. I wanted to be with my mother. I wish none of that had happened. Clayton finally spoke. I'm going to check if the building is secure and see how they're dealing with the man. He looked at Evan. "You're not alone, kid. We'll sort this out." And he left. The room was left with only Evan, Jonathan, and Margaret. The silence that hurts. Jonathan took a deep breath and slowly walked to one of the chairs, sitting down like someone who had just received a fatal blow. He didn't try to defend himself. He didn't try to justify himself. He simply rested his elbows on the table and rubbed his temples, exhausted. Margaret crossed her arms, but her posture wasn't aggressive. It was sad. "Jonathan, is that true? Everything he said?" she asked without raising her voice. Jonathan took a few seconds to respond. Not in the way he described it, but yes, I made wrong decisions at the time, decisions that hurt his mother. The ground seemed to spin slightly beneath Evan. "Why?" Evan asked without looking at him. "Why did you do that?" Jonathan lowered his head. "I was trying to protect the company." He took a deep breath. "And at the time, I was a worse man than I am today." "Worse doesn't even begin to describe it," Margaret said bitterly. "You ruined a woman's life, and you never thought to apologize, to make amends." Jonathan did not respond, because there was no answer that would absolve him. To blame. Evan wiped away his tears with his shirt sleeve, still not looking at them. "My mother, she suffered so much. She worked herself to death. She never complained. But sometimes I would wake up and she would be crying, silently, in the dark." Jonathan closed his eyes as if each word were a blow. "Evan, I knew You didn't want to know," Evan interrupted. "She was just one employee, right? One less person, one less problem." Margaret stood motionless, shocked by the sad maturity behind the boy's words. Jonathan remained silent. There was no possible moral defense. Margaret's revelation. Margaret sighed deeply, turned to the window, and watched the city. "Jonathan," she said, without looking at him, "I always knew your past had shadows." "But a child, a pregnant woman." Evan's eyes widened. "Pregnant?" he repeated. Margaret put her hand to her mouth. She had spoken without thinking. Jonathan quickly raised his face. Evan glanced between the two. You knew?" he asked, feeling breathless. "No," Margaret replied immediately, kneeling beside him. "Evan, that's not what I meant. I meant that your mother was pregnant when all this happened." Not that Jonathan was the father?" Evan asked, his voice empty, cold and painful. Margaret turned pale. Jonathan stood up immediately. "No." His voice came out firm, clear, without hesitation. "Evan, I'm not your father. I never had any personal involvement with your mother. The problem was professional, never—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "It was never about you. Not in this way." Evan closed his eyes, trying to believe it. But the seed of doubt had been planted, albeit unfairly. Margaret looked at Evan with extreme kindness. "He's telling the truth. I would be reacting much worse if he weren't." Jonathan took a deep breath. "What happened to your mother was my fault. But not in that sense. I would never have hidden a child." Silence returned. But now it was a different kind of silence. More real, more human, and more painful. Harper's arrival. A noise from the hallway broke the heavy atmosphere. Voices. Quick steps. And then, "I want to see the boy. I want to see Evan now." Evan recognized him immediately. "Harper?" He jumped up, instinctively running towards the door. Clayton went in first, trying to stop it. "You can't—" But Harper pushed his arm away with surprising force for a man nearly 60 years old. "Get out of the way," he growled. "He's my boy, my little boy. I want to see if he's all right." Evan ran towards him. I'm fine," she said, hugging the old man, who looked like he was about to burst with worry. Harper held him tightly, as if afraid that Evan would disappear if he let go. "Oh my God, kid, when they called me saying you were in the middle of a seizure." His voice faltered. "I left the store open. I think I left the freezer off. Screw it. You're more important." Evan smiled for the first time in hours, even if it was a shaky smile. Jonathan approached. Harper turned to him immediately, her eyes blazing with fire. "If that boy has a scratch because of you, I swear that—" "Harper!" Evan interrupted, pulling her arm. "He didn't do anything to me." Harper was still snorting like a protective dog, and I'm still trying to understand that's exactly what this billionaire did to his mother. Jonathan took a deep breath. "This is something we need to discuss calmly." "Calm down, my foot!" Harper stepped forward. "You think you can play with lives just because you have money?" Margaret stood up and placed her hand on Harper's shoulder. "I understand your anger, and, honestly, I think it's justified. But yelling won't solve anything. Evan needs you calm, now, more than ever." Harper took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. Okay. He looked at Evan. "Let's go home. Now, before I do something stupid." Evan nodded immediately, but Jonathan spoke carefully. "Evan, before I go, I need to do something I should have done years ago." The boy stared at him, emotionally exhausted. "What?" Jonathan opened a drawer and took out a document. "I'm going to reopen your mother's case. Publicly, I'm going to acknowledge the company's mistake, and I'm going to do something I've never done in my life. Take responsibility. Without a lawyer, without destroying evidence, without excuses." Harper narrowed her eyes. "And why should I believe you, huh?" Jonathan looked at Evan. "Because he deserves it. Not because of the company, not because of the image, but because of him." Evan took a deep breath. Does this help my mother?" "Yes," Jonathan replied, "and it's not enough, but it's a start." And for the first time since it all began, Evan saw something genuine in his eyes. Not possible, not arrogance, remorse. Leaving the room, Clayton approached. "The building is safe now. The intruder is in federal custody. You can leave safely." Harper placed her hand on Evan's back. "Come on, kid. Enough of this crazy rich kid stuff for today." Evan gave Margaret one last look, and she smiled sweetly. "If you need me, anything, I'll be here, Evan." The boy nodded, and then she looked at Jonathan. "If you're really going to do this, then don't disappoint my mother again." Jonathan swallowed hard. "I am not going." Evan went out with Harper, but he knew that this was not the end. It was only the beginning of a justice that had taken 11 years to arrive. The drive home with Harper was silent. Not an uncomfortable silence, but a silence filled with thoughts, as if they were both carrying more weight than they could bear. The old car trembled as it went over potholes, and Evan felt each vibration as a small reminder of the chaos of that day. Upon arriving, the house seemed smaller than before. Or perhaps it was he who had suddenly grown inside. The door creaked when Harper opened it, and the familiar smell of old coffee and worn wood filled the air. Evan entered slowly, touching the walls as if he were rediscovering his own home. "Sit down, kid," Harper said, taking off her coat. "You look like you've been carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders." Evan sat down, but he didn't sink into the sofa as usual. He stood upright, restless, his mind racing with things he never thought would be part of his life. "Harper," she began, but stopped. She had so many questions that she didn't know where to start. Harper pulled up a chair and sat down facing him. "Look, I don't want to force anything, but you need to understand that you're not to blame for what happened to your mother, not at all." Evan shook hands. "I know, but now I know who had it." The words came out heavy, almost bitter. Harper sighed. "That arrogant billionaire over there, right?" Evan lowered his head. "He said he's going to reopen my mother's case, but part of me—" He paused, taking a deep breath. "Part of me doesn't know if I should believe him." Harper rested his elbows on his knees. "Trust doesn't magically appear. It has to be built, brick by brick. If he wants to do that, great. But you don't owe him anything, nothing." Evan nodded. But there was something more, something bigger, something that didn't concern Jonathan. It concerned himself. The decision. That night, Evan couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling for hours, listening to the wind hitting the window and the distant sound of passing cars. It seemed like his body wanted to rest, but his mind refused. When the clock struck 4:23 in the morning, he finally got up. He went to the small kitchen table, picked up a pen and a piece of paper, and began to write. It wasn't a letter, it wasn't a request, it was a plan. The plan of a boy who no longer wanted to be vulnerable. The plan of someone who, for the first time, had seen the true size of the world and wanted to prepare to face it. When Harper woke up, she found Evan sitting at the table with deep, dark circles under his eyes, but with unprecedented determination. "You stayed up all night?" the old man asked, surprised. Evan held up the paper. "I want to work more. I want to learn more. I want to study better. I want to be able to take care of my mother in a way that no one else can hurt us." Harper watched him for several long seconds, and then she smiled. "Well, that's the kind of stubbornness that changes lives. The first step." In the following days, Evan threw himself into the routine with a discipline that surprised even Harper. He woke up 2 hours earlier to study, read everything he could about labor rights, companies, and basic laws. He began to write everything down in a notebook. "Are you going to become a lawyer now?" Harper joked one day. "I don't know yet," Evan replied, "but I want to understand how the world works." And little by little, he began to understand. He came to understand that his honest work was more valuable than he had imagined, understanding that the injustice against his mother did not define who he would become, to understand that he could grow and not just survive. The return of Jonathan. About a week later, Jonathan showed up at Harper's grocery store. Evan was unloading boxes when he saw him come in. Instinctively, his body stiffened. Harper crossed his arms, ready to intervene. Jonathan raised his hands, almost as a gesture of peace. "I didn't come to bother you. I just wanted to talk to Evan for a few minutes, if he'll allow it." Harper looked at the boy. Evan took a deep breath. "You can speak," he said calmly. Jonathan approached slowly. "I kept my promise," he said, pulling an envelope from his briefcase. "The investigation into your mother's case is officially open, not internally, publicly, and I included my signature taking responsibility for the company's decision at the time." Evan picked up the envelope, but didn't open it. "Not yet." "Why?" he asked firmly. Jonathan swallowed hard. "Because you reminded me of who I was, and who I no longer want to be." Harper frowned, examining it as if trying to detect a falsehood. But Jonathan seemed human. No arrogance, no superiority, just weight. "If you want, I can help you with anything related to this," Jonathan continued. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know it doesn't work that way. I just want to do the right thing." Evan kept the envelope. "I haven't decided if I trust you." His voice was neutral, almost adult. "But thank you for doing the right thing." Jonathan nodded with a small, sad smile. "You are stronger than many men I know, Evan, and more honest than I have been for many years." Before leaving, he glanced at Harper. "Thank you for taking care of him." Harper didn't answer. He just placed a protective hand on Evan's shoulder. Growth. That conversation didn't change everything. But Evan changed. For the first time, he realized he had a voice, he had power. It was no longer just a lost piece on the chessboard of important adults. He was someone who could choose what he would become. He continued studying. He continued working. It continued to grow. And for him, this was more than just overcoming adversity. It was justice. That was life. It was the beginning of a story that he would write with his own hands. The days following the reopening of the case passed with an eerie, almost deceptive calm. Life seemed to have found a more stable rhythm. Evan studied, worked with Harper, and, in his few free hours, tried to understand the paperwork Jonathan had handed over. Old records, internal reports, names of people no one remembered anymore, but who were now resurfacing like forgotten pieces of a shipwreck. Harper watched everything cautiously. Evan focused. Jonathan, with a silent anxiety that he tried to hide behind well-behaved smiles. It was as if everyone knew, even without saying a word, the calm wouldn't last. 1. The first shadow 1. Thursday afternoon, Evan was organizing the shelf of cleaning products when a man entered the grocery store. He had a rigid posture, an impeccable grey suit, and assessing eyes, like someone accustomed to measuring people. "Excuse me, are you Evan Miller?" the man asked directly, without introducing himself. Evan felt his body freeze for a second. "Who wants to know?" she replied, trying to keep her voice steady, as she had learned from Harper. The man smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Let's just say I'm someone interested in the recent events involving your name." Harper, who was at the checkout counter, immediately looked up. His expression hardened, as if he recognized the type. "The store isn't the place for that kind of conversation," Harper said, walking over to them. "I didn't come here to cause trouble," the man stated, taking a step back. "I just want to know if the boy understands what he's getting himself into." Evan clenched his fists. "I understand much more than before." The man tilted his head, assessing the response. "I hope so. There are people who don't like ancient excavations." He left the sentence hanging in the air like someone leaving a blade suspended. Then he left without looking back. Evan stood motionless for a few seconds. "Harper, who was that guy?" he asked, uneasy. "Harper Masaju, a tester. The kind of person who works for us, who never wants their mistakes exposed. Do you think he was from Jonathan's company?" "I don't know," Harper said, "but I think you've just attracted the attention of people who would prefer the past to remain dead." 2. The weight of truth. That night, Evan couldn't study. He tried to read, but the image of that cold smile kept coming back. Jonathan showed up at the grocery store door around 9 p.m., clearly tense. "Did you see it too?" he asked as soon as he came in. Harper answered before Evan could open his mouth. "So you know exactly who sent that man." Jonathan took off his glasses, rubbing his eyes. "He worked for one of the former directors who still has influence in the company, one of those who signed his mother's dismissal. I imagined they would react, but not so quickly." "What do they want?" Evan asked, his voice lower. Jonathan took a deep breath. "That you give up, and that I give up too." "And are you going?" Evan asked, staring at him. Jonathan hesitated for a split second, not out of weakness, but to choose the right words. "No, because if I give up now, they win, and for the first time in my life, I don't want to protect people like them." Harper crossed his arms, still suspicious. "And have you considered the price of all this?" Jonathan looked at Evan, not Harper. "Yes, and I'm willing to pay." The silence that followed was heavy, not from fear, but from understanding. The situation was becoming bigger than everyone there. 3. A new revelation. 2 days later, Jonathan arranged to meet Evan and Harper at a small cafe away from the center, a discreet place, full of people who didn't pay much attention to strangers. When they arrived, Jonathan was already there, staring seriously at his laptop. "I've found something," he said as soon as they sat down. "Something that changes a lot." He turned the laptop towards them. There were a number of scanned internal documents, reports, and in the middle of them, a message. A message signed by 3 directors from the time of Evan's mother's case. It contained the phrase, "Dawn Miller's dismissal should not trigger further investigations. Responsibility will not fall on the department that authorized the unsupervised scheduling." And below that, a list of names, including Jonathan's, who at the time was just a rising manager with little real authority. "They used you," Harper said, understanding the implication. Jonathan nodded with a bitter smile. "Yeah. In the end, I was just a convenient signature. I thought I was powerful, but I was just a pawn like any other." Evan stared at the document, his breathing quickening. "So it was never my mother's fault?" "Never," Jonathan replied. And it wasn't yours either. It was theirs. Whoever ordered it, whoever covered it up, whoever lied. Evan's eyes filled with a quiet anger. Not explosive, not childish. A steady anger. Focused, too mature for a boy of only 12 years old. 4. The movement of the pieces. That same night, Jonathan received a call while dropping Evan and Harper off at home. He answered inside the car. Yes, I found it. Long silence on the other end of the line. No, I'm not going to stop. Another silence, more tense this time. If you try to stop me, you'll go down with me. He hung up, his hand trembling, not out of fear, a decision. 5. The silent attack. The next day, when Evan arrived at work, he found Harper staring at the door of the grocery store. There was a piece of paper stuck there, unsigned, not elegant, handwritten in large letters, "Stop digging. Some truths bury those who seek them." Evan felt a shiver run down his spine. Harper tore the paper away, ripping it up. "That doesn't change anything," he said, trying to sound firm. But Evan realized that Harper was tense, too. Very tense. 6. Growth in the midst of the storm. That threat didn't make Evan give up. In fact, it further strengthened his resolve. He returned to studying that night with almost ferocious concentration. He read about corporate ethics, historical cases of illegal pressure and manipulation of reports. He wrote down ideas. It raised questions. He didn't want to be just a victim. "I wanted to be someone who understood how all of that worked." Harper watched him for a while and finally said, "You know things could get much uglier, right?" Evan slowly closed the notebook. "I know, but running away didn't make my mother any better. Understanding might help." Harper took a deep breath. You're different. Older." Evan shrugged, a gesture that unintentionally mirrored Harper's own mannerisms. "Growing hurts?" he replied. "I think that's it." 7. The Omen. On a rainy morning, Jonathan showed up at Harper's door, soaked and desperate. "They've gone too far," he said, entering without waiting for an invitation. Evan stood up from the sofa, startled. "What happened?" Jonathan placed a USB drive on the table. "Yes, this is the last piece, the piece they would do anything to hide." Harper picked up the flash drive, suspiciously. "And how did you manage that?" Jonathan took a deep breath, because someone in there finally got tired of obeying. And then, looking at Evan with a weight that no adult should place on a boy's shoulders, he said, "The truth that's here will change everything, and not in a simple way." Evan felt the air grow heavier. It's colder. He didn't know what was on that flash drive, but I knew one thing. The climax was approaching, and there was no going back now. The truth that no one could bury the rain that morning seemed heavier than any other Evan could remember. It fell as if the sky were pouring down something heavier than water, as if warning of what was to come. Jonathan, still dripping with sweat, stared at the flash drive on the table, as if it were a bomb. Harper closed all the curtains, making sure no one outside could see what they were doing. His expression was hard, almost military. He'd seen this kind of situation before. He'd experienced things he'd never told the boy. Evan sat down, his heart beating fast but silently. Jonathan took a deep breath. "I'll explain before I show you," he said, "because once it appears on the screen, there's no going back." Harper crossed his arms. "Just tell us, Jonathan." The millionaire wiped his forehead with his shirt sleeve, trembling slightly. "This flash drive contains a recording, an internal meeting, a closed meeting, held in a room with no official records. But someone was recording it without their knowledge, someone who didn't trust what they were doing, and saved it on a personal drive." "Who?" Evan asked. Jonathan hesitated still, and that, coming from him, meant the answer was weighty. The father of one of the directors," Harper frowned. "The father?" Jonathan nodded. He had worked as a security guard at the building for years. He overheard the conversation by accident. He recorded it. He kept it, but he never used it Until now. Evan swallowed hard. And the meeting was about my mother, right? Jonathan looked at him, and in his eyes there was something new, something that wasn't arrogance or guilt. It was pain. Pain for having been a part of it, even unwillingly. Yes, Evan. This meeting, it talks about her, and it talks about you, too. The silence that filled the room seemed alive. It breathed along with them. Jonathan connected the USB drive to the laptop, and then he pressed play. The recording. The screen went black for a few seconds before the sound started, muffled but clear enough. We can't take responsibility. That would destroy the company. Her dismissal was the least damaging outcome. And the boy? Will he be able to say anything in the future? How old was he? 2, 3 years old? He won't remember anything. The problem isn't remembering. The problem is someone encouraging him in the future. So, what do you suggest? The conversation continued, each sentence more serious than the last. Evan felt his chest tighten. Harper clenched his fists, white with rage. Jonathan ran a hand over his face, as if he wanted to erase that memory from the world. Then came the final part, the one that changed everything. Someone needs to take the official step of signing. And who's going to be the idiot? The new kid. Ambitious. The one who believes any order if they say it's to advance in the company. Jonathan Hayes. That's it. He's too young to realize. Put his name on it. What if this happens again in the future? It won't happen. People like that never get promoted enough to open their mouths. The recording stopped. The silence that followed was so heavy it seemed to crush the air. Evan felt his hands trembling, not from fear, out of fury, out of injustice. His voice faltered, but he continued more firmly, they ruined my mother's life to protect their own careers. Jonathan nodded, his voice choked with emotion. Yes. Harper squeezed the boy's shoulder. This is ammunition, he said, but it's also a target on our backs. Jonathan turned pale. They know that recording exists. The man who passed it to me was scared. He said someone else found out he had the file. He ran away, and I haven't been able to contact him since yesterday. Do you think they did something to him? Evan asked. Jonathan closed his eyes. I think he's missing. The word echoed through the room. Missing. The battle begins. Harper wasted no time. He picked up the laptop and closed it. He stored it in the locked cupboard, and he spoke with the voice of someone who carried experience he had never recounted before. This isn't leaving here today. We're not opening anything. We're not posting anything. Before using this, we need to protect ourselves. And fast. Jonathan agreed. Evan took a deep breath. What would they do if they found out we have this? Jonathan replied without hesitation, anything. The word hung in the air like a blade. The direct threat. 4 hours later, at a little after 3 in the morning, someone knocked on the door. It wasn't a loud hit. It was calm, controlled, frighteningly polite. Harper raised her hand, signaling for Evan not to move. She grabbed an old baseball bat that was behind the door. Jonathan stood behind the boy, as if instinctively wanting to protect him. The beat came again. Harper Bennett, said a male voice. We know you're awake. Can we talk? Harper whispered. Stay behind me, and don't say anything. He opened the door, using only the chain. Outside, under the dim light of the porch, stood 2 men in black suits, wet from the rain, but impeccably calm. What do you want? Harper asked. The man on the left smiled, the same empty smile that Evan recognized. He was the grocer. We just want to talk, he said. Something simple, civilized. I have nothing to talk to you about, Harper replied curtly. The man sighed, as if dealing with stubborn children. The recording, he said. We need it. Evan froze. Harper narrowed her eyes. And who said we have that? The man tilted his head. Harper, you're smart. You know we're not asking. We're just giving you the opportunity to deliver without complications. Jonathan stepped forward, reckless but courageous. You're not going to touch him, not the boy, not anyone." The man raised an eyebrow. "Jonathan Hayes, of all people, you. We never imagined you'd stoop to this level." Jonathan clenched his teeth. "I will never be your pawn again." The man's expression changed. It spiraled out of control and fell into contempt. "So I think we understand each other." He took a step back. "We'll be back tomorrow. And when we return, we hope you'll make the right choice." And then, as if nothing had happened, he and the other man turned and disappeared into the rain. Harper closed the door slowly. As soon as she locked it, she turned to the two of them. "You won't be here tomorrow." Evan frowned. "Like this?" Harper took a deep breath. "They're not bluffing, Evan. People like that don't come back to talk. They come back to take." Jonathan shook his head. "Harper, I can solve this. I have the resources, You have no idea what level they're at," Harper interrupted. "Resources don't matter when the other side isn't playing fair." Evan clenched his fist. "So what are we going to do then?" Harper looked at him, with a look that mixed affection and hardness. "Survive. That's what we're going to do." The difficult choice. The plan was quick, practical, simple enough to work. They would. 1. Copy the recording to 3 different locations. 2. Send a copy to an old contact of Harper's, someone off the radar. 3. Take another copy to a reliable journalist. 4. And leave one last one hidden. Jonathan took responsibility for delivering the copy personally. Harper and Evan would meet at an alternate meeting point, but before they left, Evan said, "If they come after us, what do we do?" Harper responded with the stark truth. "Run. Don't confront. Don't speak. Just run." The chase. It didn't take long for things to go wrong. As soon as Jonathan got into the car, 2 black vehicles appeared at the end of the street, silent, without headlights. Harper cursed under his breath. "They've been monitoring it since early this morning. Bastards!" Jonathan accelerated. Evan saw the cars chasing him. "They're going to get him." Harper held the boy by the shoulders. "He knows what to do, Evan. Trust him. Now let's go." They ran through the back of the house, entering small streets, cutting through alleys, in the rain that was beginning to turn into a storm. While they were running, Harper's phone vibrated. He answered. "Jonathan." "They saw me. Did you manage to throw them off the scent?" "I'm trying, but—" "Harper. Hey, Jonathan. If I can't do it, tell Evan that. He gave me a second chance to be human." The call dropped. Evan turned pale. "Harper. Don't think about that now. Keep running." But Evan was no longer just a boy. It was someone carrying the weight of truths that adults had hidden for years. The confrontation. They arrived at an abandoned warehouse, the meeting point Harper had planned. But something was wrong, very wrong. The door was open, and inside someone was waiting. The man with the cold smile, alone, no bodyguards, and that was much worse. "Good evening," he said. "You took your time." Harper pushed Evan back. Do you have 5 seconds to leave?" "Harper," the man interrupted, raising his hand. "I'm not here for violence." "Then why are you here?" Evan asked, with a courage that seemed too good for a child. The man looked at him with an almost respectful expression. "Because you deserve to understand why all of this is happening." He took a step closer. "The recording you have, it's not just about your mother. It's not just about the company. It's about an entire system of people who cannot, and will not, allow this to come to light. If this truth comes out, it's not just careers that end. It's decades of power." And then he said the phrase that made Evan feel a chill run through his body. "And you, Evan Miller, you're the only piece they can't control." Harper moved forward. "That's enough. Not another word." The man smiled. "I didn't come to bring anything today, just to let you know that there will be no more conversation tomorrow." He approached the boy. She looked him in the eyes, and he said, "You are strong, but the world doesn't care about the strength of boys. Protect yourself, or you'll end up like your mother." Harper lost control. He pushed the man against the wall. "Say one more word about her, and I'll make you swallow every single tooth." The man did not react. He did not resist. She simply looked at Harper indifferently. "I don't need to threaten. The clock is already ticking." And then he left without any hurry, leaving only the sound of the rain and a devastating silence. The turning point. When they were alone, Evan finally broke down. "Harper, they're going to kill us. They're going to kill Jonathan. What if it's my fault? What if I had let everything go?" Harper cupped his face in both hands. "Look at me. Look." Evan, with tears in his eyes, looked up. "It's not your fault. It never was. You didn't ask for any of this. You didn't provoke any of this, and you won't be destroyed by cowardly people." Evan was trembling. "So what do we do?" Harper took a deep breath. "We finish what we started." "But how?" Harper looked at the flash drive hidden in the inside pocket of his jacket. "Exposing the truth before they can erase you." Evan swallowed hard. "Does that mean now?" "Now. Evan faces the world." They rushed to the building of the journalist recommended by Jonathan, a serious man accustomed to threats, with a history of confronting powerful corporations. He heard. He watched the recording. His eyes widened, and he said, "This is going to bring down some big names. Do you understand that when this is over, you won't be able to go back to your normal lives?" Evan looked at Harper. Harper looked at him. And Evan, with heartbreaking maturity, replied, "I never had a normal life to go back to." The journalist nodded, with genuine respect. "So let's begin." He plugged in the USB drive, prepared secure shipping for multiple vehicles. He created mirrors, backups, redundancies, and when he finally pressed the button, he turned to them. "The truth is out there. Now no one can erase it anymore." The last question. As they left the building, Evan looked at Harper with fear but also with strength. "And now?" Harper placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Now, Evan, hold on tight." "Why?" Harper looked out at the street, at the lights coming on in the distance, at the worsening storm, and he replied, "Because their downfall began. And when powerful people fall, they always try to take someone else down with them. It was the beginning of the end, and Evan was in the eye of the storm. The news of the disappearance of the Foundation's employees was just the beginning. In the following days, signs that something much bigger was moving behind the scenes began to emerge, discreet but impossible to ignore. Things start to disappear. First, it was the civil servants, next, documents, then people. Nothing dramatic enough to generate news stories, yet nothing concrete enough to trigger an investigation by the FBI, the press, or investors. But subtly, people who asked too many questions were replaced without warning. When Ethan called the legal consultant who had helped him understand the implications of the audit, the voice on the other end of the line replied, "You must have the wrong number. We don't have anyone by that name working here." But he had messages from her. He had emails. She had existed. I had spent hours on the phone with him, but now it was as if I had never worked at the company. Ethan hung up slowly. The boy, sitting on the sofa next to him, noticed the heavy silence. "Did they make her disappear too?" Ethan didn't lie. "I think so." The boy looked out the window at the quiet street outside, completely oblivious to the forces that move behind mirrored glass and unsigned contracts. "They're erasing the world, Ethan." Ethan took a deep breath. "No, they're only deleting the parts that are causing problems." The unexpected invitation. 3 days later, Ethan received an informal invitation to a strategic alignment meeting. Location: a corporate building in Arlington, Virginia. Those familiar with the American business environment know if a billionaire is called into a building in Arlington to discuss alignment, it's not simply work. Upon arriving, he realized that there was no logo on the facade, there was no receptionist on the ground floor, there was no company identification. Ethan entered the meeting room and, for the first time in a long time, felt afraid. 4 people were there. He didn't know any of them. They all seemed to know him very well. The woman at the head of the table didn't ask him to sit down. He ordered it. "We want to confirm that you are not involved in any improper disclosure of information, Mr. Hale." The speech was formal, but the atmosphere wasn't. It was an interrogation, tense, precisely calibrated. And amidst the questions, a detail that shouldn't be there. They knew about the boy, and they knew his name. Ethan understood the subtext. They knew everything, a revelation that changes everything. When the meeting ended, one of the men accompanied him to the elevator. He was the only one who had spoken very little, the only one who seemed more human. In the parking lot, before Ethan got into the car, the man said quietly, "They're worried. Not about you, about the boy." Ethan froze. "Why?" he almost whispered. The man breathed slowly, as if he were breaking protocol. "Because this boy knows how to distinguish real honesty from a facade, and that doesn't exist in people so young. And when it does exist, it's uncontrollable. And when it's uncontrollable, it's dangerous for everyone involved." Ethan swallowed hard. "What does this mean?" The man looked around, alert. "This means it's the only variable that nobody can predict. And when nobody can predict it, the system tries to neutralize it." Ethan felt his blood run cold. "Neutralize? What do you mean?" The man did not answer. He simply walked to his own car and said, before closing the door, "Go home, and don't leave him alone. Not for a minute." And then he left. The strange movement on the street. That night, Ethan and the boy were in the apartment. Everything looked the same, normal, common, until the boy, always observant, always sensitive to details that no one else notices, said softly, "That pickup truck wasn't there yesterday." Ethan looked out the window, a white truck with no front license plate parked on the corner, not even that black car, and neither did those 2 people pretending to walk around with coffee in their hands for 40 minutes. That was true. None of that movement was organic. Ethan felt the instinctive reflex of something ancient, a feeling that only arises when danger is truly near. "We need to get out of here," said the boy. "Try," replied Ethan immediately, but he didn't know where. The message that shouldn't exist. When Ethan picked up his cell phone, he saw a notification. Message from an unknown number. It contained no threat. It contained no requirement. It contained nothing that could be used against anyone. Just, "He asked to see if you were honest. Now we want to see if he is." And below that, an address. M. Washington, D.C. Dali is 20 minutes away. The boy read the message and said, "They want me to go." Ethan answered immediately, without hesitation, "You're not going anywhere." But the boy, very calm, very serious, said something Ethan didn't expect. "Ethan, if I don't go, they'll come here. And then you won't be able to protect me." The billionaire felt a fear he never thought he would feel, not for the money, not for the reputation, but for another person. "I'll go with you," he said. The boy nodded, with the maturity of someone who understands real risk. "I know." And they went down the stairs together, in silence. The story was about to collide with its true climax, and, as always happens in the best stories, nothing would be as it seemed. They drove in silence. The city seemed different, not because of the scenery, but because of the feeling that everything was watching. The boy kept his gaze fixed on the window. Ethan kept his hands tense on the steering wheel. The address led to an unassuming building in Washington, D.C. There was no name on the facade, not even a doorman, not even movement, just a glass door that opened by itself as they approached. Inside, a long corridor and an elevator already open, waiting. "If this is a trap," murmured Ethan. The boy responded as someone who had accepted a destiny greater than himself. "It's not a trap. It's a test, just like the one I did with you." Ethan looked at him. In the boy's eyes there was fear, but behind it all there was something greater. Conviction. They got into the elevator. The door closed without any button being pressed, the basement level. The elevator descended further than seemed possible. 1 floor, 2, 5, 10. Ethan lost count. When it finally stopped, it opened onto a huge, white, silent hall with 3 people waiting, the same ones from the meeting in Arlington, except for the man who had warned about the risk. In the center of the room, a metal table. On top of it, a folder. The woman at the head of the table said, "He came, even without guarantees. That says a lot." The boy took a step forward. "What do you want?" The woman opened the folder. Inside it were photos about the boy since I was little, in different schools, in different shelters, on different streets. The last photo was recent. Dale com Ethan, at the cafe on the day they met. But this photo was never taken by anyone who was nearby. Ethan felt his stomach drop. The woman continued, "His background is unusual. Turn over another page. You don't lie. You never lie, not even in self-defense. Not to please, not to manipulate. This isn't just rare. It's statistically anomalous." The boy swallowed hard. "Is that a reason for them to persecute me?" "It's a reason to try to understand what you are," replied the woman calmly. "Children who don't lie don't grow up that way. Something happens. Traumas, conditioning, dysfunctions. But you are not like that. You are functional, empathetic, analytical, and yet completely immune to dishonesty." She stood up. "You are not dangerous. People become dangerous around you." Ethan didn't understand. "What does this mean?" The woman turned to him. "It means that he awakens honesty wherever he goes. He forces people to confront who they are. This changes decisions. It undermines agreements. It hinders investments. It prevents entire negotiations." Ethan took a step back. "Do you want to silence him?" The woman replied with unsettling calm. "We want to know if he is consistent with what he seems to be, if he is honest enough to be set free, or..." He paused. "If it is a risk that needs to be monitored very closely." The boy took a deep breath. "And how do you intend to find that out?" The woman pointed to the back of the room. "The final test. There was another table there, simple, child-friendly, with 2 small chairs. About her, a sealed letter." The woman explained. "We placed a moral situation within this letter. There is no right answer. There is only consistency." Ethan shouted, "He's 12 years old! Have you all lost your minds?" The woman maintained a soft tone. "Integrity knows no age, Mr. Hale. You should know that, after all. He was the one who tested you first." The boy placed his hand on Ethan's shoulder. "That's fine. I can do it." Ethan looked at him, desperate, but he saw something in the boy that he had never seen before. Courage, a serene courage, honest. The boy sat down. He opened the letter, Lev, and he remained motionless, completely immobile. Ethan couldn't see the text, but the boy, after a few seconds, closed his eyes, as if he were holding something very heavy inside him. Then he raised his head and said in the firmest voice he had ever had, "My answer is, I wouldn't do any of that." The woman frowned, surprised. "Wouldn't you do anything? But you're not allowed to remain neutral." The boy replied, "You've written a scenario where any choice hurts someone. Any path requires a lie. And if I have to lose something, I'll lose it. But I don't sacrifice anyone to save myself." The room fell silent, deep, free, full. The woman took a deep breath, as if seeing something unexpected. "Yes, that's exactly what he is." He looked at the other 2. Consistent, incorruptible, and unfortunately, unpredictable. She closed the folder. Then she looked at the boy. "You can go." The boy's eyes widened. "Just that? Just that?" Ethan stepped forward. "What will happen now?" The woman approached him. "Now, You're going to live your lives, but know this. You weren't the one who changed that boy. He was the one who changed you." And he added with an enigmatic expression, "And that is what scares certain institutions the most, the escape that isn't an escape." Ethan and the boy walked down the long hallway to the elevator. No guards, no doors locked, no threat. When the door closed and the elevator began to ascend, Ethan finally asked, "What did the letter say?" The boy took a while to answer. "He said that if I lied to save my life, some innocent person would be blamed in my place." She looked at Ethan. "And if I told the truth, I would be the one to blame, even though I hadn't done anything." Ethan was speechless. He understood immediately. He understood why those people were afraid. He understood why it all started. The boy's honesty was not moral. It was dangerous. Not because it destroyed others, but because he forced the world to be truthful around him. And the world doesn't like that. The moment that changes history. The elevator opened on the ground floor. The night was cold, silent, spotlessly clean. And when Ethan and the boy crossed the street, a figure standing on the sidewalk was waiting for them. The man from the previous meeting, the only one who had seemed genuinely concerned. He smiled slightly. "You passed, but that doesn't mean it's over." Ethan shielded the boy with his body. "What's missing?" The man put his hands in his pockets. "Now comes the hard part, living knowing that what you have together bothers a lot of people." He paused. "And to live anyway." The boy smiled, a small but firm smile. "We can do it," the man nodded. "I know." And then he said something Ethan would never forget. He didn't test you to see if you were honest. He tested you to see if you were strong enough to handle a boy who would never lie to you. Few adults could do it. You did. That's why everything changed. And then he walked down the street, disappearing into the darkness. The drive home was silent, not out of fear, not because of shock, but because something profound had changed between them. A silent understanding, a pact that didn't need to be spoken. Ethan parked the car in the building's garage. The boy descended slowly, as if he were returning from a place far more distant than an underground tunnel in Washington. When they entered the apartment, the atmosphere seemed different. Even though it was the same space, there was something new there. Security. Not because they were protected, but because they were together. The conversation that changes everything. They sat down on the sofa. Nothing was lit except for the soft light from the kitchen. Ethan took a deep breath. "Are you well?" The boy thought for a few seconds, as he always did before answering. "I am, just tired." She looked at Ethan. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Would you have lied for me today?" The question caught him off guard. Ethan remained silent for a few seconds, staring at the boy, staring at the absolute honesty that resided there in his eyes. "Try," he finally replied. "I would have lied. If it would save you, I would lie." Without a second thought. The boy didn't smile. He wasn't shocked. He didn't judge. He simply nodded, as if acknowledging an important truth. "I knew," and he added, "That's why we work. You do what I can't do, and I do what you've forgotten how to do." Ethan felt it hit him hard. "So what exactly do you do?" The boy answered without hesitation. "I remind you of who you were before the money." Ethan was unable to speak for a few seconds. She just breathed, deeply, heavily, painfully, because it was true. He had been an honest, curious, and simple boy, and wealth over the years had transformed that honesty into caution, that curiosity into paranoia, that simplicity into armor. The boy was returning a piece of himself that he didn't even realize he had lost. The next day, and the fear that remains. The following morning, the white pickup truck was no longer on the street. Not even the black car, not even the pedestrians who weren't walking. Everything seemed to have evaporated. But Ethan knew. These kinds of people never disappear. It just changes position. He didn't tell the boy that. And the boy, who understood everything, didn't ask him to tell the story. The unexpected request. A week later, the boy walked into Ethan's office holding his old, crumpled notebook, the one in which he always wrote things he considered important. "I want to ask you something." Ethan looked up from his computer. "You can ask." The boy took a deep breath. "Can you teach me about your world? About business, investments, contracts, that kind of thing?" That surprised Ethan. "Why?" The boy shrugged, but his eyes said more than he seemed willing to admit. "Because if I'm going to live in a world full of people who lie, I need to know how it works, because I trust you, and because I don't want to grow up without understanding why people are so afraid of the truth." Ethan almost smiled, an emotional, sincere smile. "I teach you everything you want to learn." The boy nodded, as if accepting a mission. The subtle, yet powerful, change. The days passed. Ethan, once surrounded by people who told him what he wanted to hear, now spent afternoons explaining concepts to a 12-year-old boy that no one had the patience to make simple. And the boy asked questions that no adult would dare to ask. Why does this contract have a hidden clause? If it's true, why do you complicate the words? Why would anyone accept earning more by lying than by being honest? Ethan would answer, sometimes with pride, sometimes with shame. It was like being seen from the inside, and for the first time it didn't bother him. The return of someone no one expected. 3 months later, on a quiet afternoon, there was a knock at the door. Ethan looked through the viewfinder. He was the man who warned them, the only one who had shown humanity. Ethan opened it. "We need to talk." The boy appeared behind him. "Is it about me?" he asked. The man nodded. "Yes, but not like before. Now you have a decision to make." He went in. He sat down. He took a deep breath. "The institution has decided it will no longer interfere in your lives, but that doesn't mean the risks have disappeared. People with that kind of moral impact attract attention. Others, good and bad." Ethan crossed his arms. "What do you mean?" The man turned to the boy. "You are not a project. You are not an experiment. You are not a mistake. You are rare, extremely rare. And rare people always have two paths, to hide or to transform the world around them." The boy swallowed hard. "So what should I do?" The man smiled for the first time. A small but genuine smile. "What you always do. Tell the truth, and let others decide what to do with it." He stood up. He placed a card on the table. "If anyone ever tries to silence you again, call me. It doesn't matter what time it is." And he left. The ending, which isn't really an ending. That night, Ethan and the boy sat on the porch watching the city lights. The boy asked, "Do you think I can really change anything?" Ethan looked at him. "I think you've already changed." The boy smiled. A gentle, genuine smile. "So I guess it's okay if the world is afraid of me. I'm a little afraid of him too." "It's normal," replied Ethan. "But you don't have to face it alone. I'm here, and I'll stay here." The boy rested his head on his shoulder. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt peace. The real one. That which comes not from money, nor from power, nor from control. But there was something he didn't know he was still capable of feeling. Honesty, and a bow, and family. Not blood relatives, but the family you choose. And so the story ends, or maybe it will begin. Because all profound truth, it always opens more paths than it closes.